The sun had just begun to dip behind the tall houses at the end of the street, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The evening was quiet except for the soft sound of sneakers against the pavement and the distant hum of cars. A teenage boy walked along the sidewalk, his backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds in, listening to music that helped him forget how long the day had been. He wasn't in a rush. He'd just left basketball practice, his favorite part of the day, and he liked taking the long way home. It gave him time to think. The air was cool and he could smell the fresh-cut grass from someone's yard. He had no idea that just a few houses away, someone was looking out a window, watching him, misunderstanding everything about what they saw. The woman inside that house frowned. She didn't recognize him, and didn't bother to notice the basketball in his bag or the school logo on his hoodie. She picked up her phone and made a call. Her voice was tense when she spoke to the emergency operator. She said she saw someone suspicious walking around the neighborhood. She didn't mention that he was just walking on the sidewalk, not bothering anyone. The boy had no clue about the call. He was thinking about dinner, about the math homework he still had to finish, and about the funny story his friend had told him earlier. His music played softly and he smiled to himself, lost in thought. A few minutes later, he noticed flashing lights reflecting off the nearby windows. He turned his head, confused. 2 police cars pulled up fast, tires screeching a little as they stopped. The sudden noise made him take out one earbud, unsure what was happening. One of the officers got out quickly, hand resting on his side as he shouted something the boy didn't quite hear at first. He froze, lowering the volume of his music. The officer's voice grew louder, more forceful. "Hey, stop right there." The boy stopped immediately. He didn't know what else to do. His heart started to beat faster. Not because he'd done anything wrong, but because something about the officer's tone made him nervous. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice shaky. "Hands where I can see them," one officer shouted. The boy raised his hands, confused and scared. He looked around, hoping someone would explain why 2 police cars were surrounding him like he was dangerous. The other officer stepped closer, asking what he was doing there. "I'm just walking home," the boy said softly. "I live over there," he pointed down the street. "Why are you walking here?" The officer asked again, his voice still sharp. "I told you," the boy repeated. "I'm going home. From practice." He tried to sound calm, but his voice trembled. He could feel his chest tighten as the questions kept coming. Where was he coming from? What was in his bag? Did he have any ID? He answered everything as politely as he could, but the officers didn't seem to believe him. One officer glanced at the other and said something under his breath. Then the second one stepped closer, telling the boy to take his hands out of his pockets even though they were already raised. The boy didn't move at first. He didn't know what the right thing to do was. "Sir, my hands are up," he said quietly. "Don't talk back," the officer snapped. The boy's eyes darted around. A few people had come out of their houses now, watching from porches and driveways. Someone had even taken out a phone and started recording. He could hear his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He just wanted to go home. He just wanted this to be over. The first officer stepped closer and reached for the boy's backpack. "What's in here?" he asked, unzipping it without waiting for permission. Inside, he found a basketball, a water bottle, and a notebook. He sighed as if disappointed that there wasn't anything else. "That's my stuff for practice," the boy said, his voice breaking slightly. "Where's your ID?" the officer asked again. "It's in my pocket," the boy said carefully. "Can I reach for it?" The officers exchanged a look. One of them nodded. The boy slowly lowered one hand, moving slowly like he'd seen people do in those videos online, the ones that always ended badly. He pulled out his wallet, holding it open to show his school ID. "That's me," he said. "I go to the high school." The officer took the ID and looked at it for a long moment as if searching for a reason not to believe him. The other one paced nearby, glancing around like something about the quiet street made him uneasy. A car drove past slowly, then stopped when the driver noticed what was happening. More people began to watch. Someone whispered, "He's just a kid." The boy stood still, his arms still raised, his throat dry. He tried to swallow, but it felt like his mouth had turned to sand. He kept thinking of his mom, how she'd always told him to stay calm, to be respectful if something like this ever happened. She'd always worried, even when he said she didn't need to. Now he understood why she'd worried so much. The officer holding his ID started asking more questions. Why are you walking here if you live on the next block? Why didn't you take another route? I always walk this way, he said quietly. It's shorter. The other officer was scanning the area, maybe looking for something to justify what they were doing. But there was nothing. No broken windows, no noise, no reason for any of it. Just a boy with a backpack. The boy's hands were trembling now. He didn't know if it was from fear or frustration. Can I go home now? He asked softly. The officer didn't answer. Instead, he spoke into his radio, saying something the boy couldn't make out. The silence that followed felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on him. Minutes passed, though they felt longer. The boy shifted slightly on his feet, trying to stay calm. He could feel all the eyes on him. Every breath felt like it took effort. Suddenly, the radio on the officer's shoulder crackled. A voice came through, muffled but serious. The officer listened for a moment, then nodded. He looked at the boy again. We're verifying something, he said. The boy just nodded. What could he say? Then another car turned the corner. Not a police cruiser, but a black SUV. It was moving fast, stopping hard behind the patrol cars. The door opened and someone stepped out. The boy couldn't see who it was yet, but the way the officers suddenly straightened told him it was someone important. Before anyone could speak, a woman's voice cut through the air, sharp, commanding, full of authority. What's going on here? Both officers turned toward her, their faces changing instantly. The boy blinked, recognizing the voice. His chest loosened just a little. She walked forward quickly, not hesitating for a second. Her badge hung from her belt, glinting in the fading light. The officers froze as they saw it. The woman's tone hardened. I asked you a question. The officers stuttered something about a suspicious person. That suspicious person, she said, pointing directly at the boy, is my son. The boy exhaled shakily, relief washing over him. He could finally lower his hands. The neighbors kept filming, whispering. The air around them changed. The same officers who had been barking orders moments ago now stood silent, unsure what to say. The woman looked at her son, checking him from head to toe, then turned back to the officers with eyes that could cut through steel. You stopped a kid walking home from practice because someone made a call? Did either of you even ask his name before surrounding him? Neither officer answered. The silence was louder than any siren. She stepped closer, her voice calm but dangerous. Do you know who I am? The taller officer nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. Then you should know better, she said. The boy stood still, not wanting to interrupt, still shaken but finally safe. The woman turned to her son again, placing a hand on his shoulder. It's all right, she said softly. You're going home now. And in that moment, everything, the fear, the confusion, the noise, started to fade. The flashing lights reflected in her badge, in his wide eyes, and in the screens of all the phones around them. The scene that had started as a misunderstanding was ending with quiet disbelief. The boy didn't say much as his mother guided him toward her car. He just looked back once, at the officers, at the crowd, at the place where his ordinary walk had turned into something he'd never forget. He realized how fast things could change, how quickly an ordinary evening could become a headline, and how sometimes the only thing standing between danger and safety was a person who refused to stay silent. The ride home was silent at first. The boy sat in the passenger seat, his hands still trembling slightly. His mother kept her eyes on the road, her jaw tight. The flashing lights were fading behind them, but the sound of those sharp voices still echoed in his head. He stared out the window, watching the houses blur past. Everything looked the same, but somehow it all felt different now. After a few minutes, his mother spoke softly, her voice calmer now. Are you all right? He nodded, though he didn't feel all right. His throat felt heavy, and his chest still hurt from holding his breath for so long. I'm fine, he said, but she could tell he wasn't. You don't have to say that, she replied. You don't have to be fine right now. He didn't answer. He didn't know how to explain what it felt like. That strange mix of fear, confusion, and anger. He'd seen videos like that online, but he never thought he'd be in one. His mother reached over and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. You did everything right, she said. You stayed calm. He nodded again, still staring out the window. They thought I did something bad, he whispered. I didn't even do anything, she sighed. I know, she said softly. And that's what hurts the most. When they got home, the house was quiet. The air smelled like dinner that had gone cold. The boy went straight to his room and sat on the edge of his bed. His backpack was still open from when the officer had searched it. He pulled out his basketball and rolled it between his hands, trying to think about something else, anything else. But he couldn't stop seeing the lights, hearing the voices, feeling that moment when everything could have gone wrong. He thought about how scared he'd been to move, even just to breathe. After a while, his mother knocked on the door. "Can I come in?" He nodded. She sat beside him, resting her hands on her knees. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She just looked at him, really looked at him, and it broke her heart to see the fear that still lingered in his eyes. "I know tonight was hard," she said quietly, "but I need you to understand something. What happened to you wasn't your fault. You didn't deserve that." He swallowed hard. "Why did they stop me?" "Because someone made a call," she said. "And because those officers saw what they expected to see, not what was real." He looked down. "But you work with people like them," he said. "You're one of them." Her lips pressed together. "Yes," she said slowly. "And that's exactly why this hurts me so much." She told him about the years she'd spent trying to change things from the inside, how she believed in justice, in fairness, in doing things the right way. But even in her job, she had seen how quick some people were to make assumptions. "I've worn this badge for a long time," she said. "But when I saw them with you, all I could think about was that they didn't see you as a kid. They saw something to be afraid of. And that's not how this should be." He was quiet for a long time. Then he whispered, "Would they have listened to me if you hadn't come?" Her throat tightened. "I don't know," she said honestly. "And that's what scares me." The boy looked up at her. "You were so angry," he said softly. "I've never seen you like that," she sighed. "Because I'm your mother before I'm anything else. I've seen too many stories like this. I wasn't going to let you become one of them." Her voice cracked slightly as she said it. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. That night, she filed an official report about what happened. She knew the right channels, the right words to use, and the right people to contact. She wasn't doing it just as an agent. She was doing it as a mother who refused to let silence protect the wrong people. While she worked on the report, the boy lay awake in his room. His phone buzzed every few minutes, messages from friends who had already seen the video online. Someone from the neighborhood had posted it. It was spreading fast. He didn't even want to look at it, but curiosity got the better of him. When he finally opened the video, his stomach turned. There he was, standing under those bright police lights, his hands shaking, trying to explain himself. He looked so small, so scared. The comments under the video made it worse. Some people were angry at the officers. Others said he must have done something to look suspicious. He turned off his phone and stared at the ceiling. It didn't feel real. The next morning, when he walked into the kitchen, his mother was already dressed for work. Her badge hung from her belt again, and her coffee sat untouched on the counter. She looked tired, but her eyes were steady. "I'm going to handle this," she said. "But I want you to know something. I'm proud of you." He blinked, surprised. "Proud of me? For what?" "For keeping calm," she said. "For not letting fear control you." He wanted to believe her, but he still felt like a part of him had been taken away, like something inside him had changed. That day at school, everyone knew. People whispered as he walked past. Some came up to ask questions. Others just stared. A few teachers treated him differently, too carefully, as if afraid to say the wrong thing. At lunch, his best friend sat across from him and said, "Man, that video's everywhere. My mom showed it to me this morning." The boy nodded slowly. "Yeah, I saw it too. She said your mom's a real one," his friend added. "She just pulled up and handled it." The boy smiled weakly. Yeah, she did, but he didn't feel like smiling. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those lights again. After school, his mom picked him up instead of letting him walk. The car ride was quiet again. He could tell she was thinking hard about something. Finally, she said, "They've opened an investigation." He turned to her. "Into what?" "Into what happened last night," she said. "The officer's behavior, the call that started it, everything." He nodded slowly, unsure how to feel. "Will anything happen to them?" "I don't know yet," she said. "But I'm going to make sure they can't just walk away like it was nothing." That night, she sat at her desk again, filling out more forms, sending emails, making phone calls. The boy watched from the hallway for a moment. He'd always known his mother's job was serious, but he'd never seen her this focused, this determined. Later, she joined him in the living room. The TV was on, but neither of them was really watching. "You know," she said softly, "when I joined the Bureau, I believed that if I worked hard enough, I could change things. That being part of the system meant I could fix it from inside." He looked at her, waiting for her to go on. "But the truth is," she said, "it's not that simple. Change is slow, and sometimes it takes moments like last night to remind people why it's needed." He nodded, not sure what to say. "You did everything right," she said again. "And even when people don't see it, you have to remember who you are. Don't let fear define you." He wanted to ask her how she stayed so strong, how she could face those same people at work every day and still believe in justice. But before he could, she smiled faintly and said, "Get some rest. Tomorrow's another day." He tried to sleep, but his mind kept replaying the same scene. The flashing lights, the shouting, his mother's voice cutting through it all. He realized that in one night everything had changed for both of them. The next morning a reporter showed up outside their house. Then another. His mother spoke to them calmly, saying only that the incident was under review. She didn't mention that she was an agent. She didn't need to. The way she carried herself said enough. The story spread quickly. News outlets picked it up. Some called it a powerful reminder of racial bias. Others focused on how the situation could have ended badly if she hadn't arrived. At school, more people came up to him saying things like, "You're famous now," or "That was wild, man." But fame was the last thing he wanted. He didn't want to be known for what happened. He just wanted things to go back to how they were. Simple, quiet, normal. That evening, his mother came home later than usual. She looked tired but more at peace. "They suspended both officers," she said quietly. "Pending investigation." He nodded slowly. "Good," she sat beside him. "Justice doesn't always come easy," she said. "But it starts when people stop pretending nothing's wrong." He leaned against her shoulder, finally letting himself relax. The world still felt unfair, but for the first time in days, he felt safe. And even though he knew the story wasn't over, he also knew that having her, a mother who fought for truth, meant he wouldn't face it alone. The next few weeks felt like a blur. Every day seemed to bring something new. Reporters outside the house, strangers sending messages online, people recognizing them at the grocery store. The story had spread faster than either of them expected. What had started as a frightening evening had become something much bigger, something they couldn't fully control. The boy had never liked attention, and now it felt like he couldn't escape it. At school, students whispered about him in the hallways. Teachers looked at him with sympathy that felt heavy instead of comforting. Even people he'd never talked to before came up to ask what it was like. Some meant well, but it all felt too much. He didn't want to relive that night over and over again just so people could satisfy their curiosity. He kept his answers short. "It was scary," he would say, "but I'm okay now." The truth was, he wasn't completely okay. He still jumped whenever he saw flashing lights on the street. He still replayed the officer's voice in his head, the one that had shouted at him like he was dangerous. And every night before bed, he double-checked the locks on the doors, not because he didn't feel safe at home, but because something inside him had changed. His mother noticed. She didn't push him to talk, but she stayed close. She made sure to eat dinner with him every night, even when her work schedule was busy. She'd ask about school, his friends, basketball, anything that might make him talk about something normal again. But sometimes, even when they were laughing about something small, he could see the worry in her eyes. She carried herself like someone used to being strong, but now and then that strength cracked just a little. One evening, he found her sitting on the porch after work, her coffee growing cold beside her. She was staring into the distance, lost in thought. He stepped outside and sat next to her. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She looked at him and gave a small smile. "Just thinking." "About what?" She hesitated. "About how quickly things change," she said. "One moment you think you're doing everything right, working hard, raising your kid, trying to make the world a little better. And then suddenly, one phone call turns everything upside down." He looked down at his hands. "Do you wish it didn't happen?" She thought for a moment before answering. "I wish you didn't have to go through it," she said. "But if it had to happen, I'm glad people saw it. Sometimes people need to see the truth before they believe it." He nodded slowly. He understood what she meant, but it still didn't make it easier. Over the next few days, his mother received calls from community leaders and organizations who wanted her to speak about what happened. At first, she said no. She didn't want to turn something so personal into a headline or a speech. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized silence wasn't helping anyone. One evening, she sat her son down at the kitchen table. "I've been asked to talk at a community meeting next week," she said. "They want me to share what happened and talk about accountability." He looked at her nervously. "Are you going to do it?" She nodded. "I think I have to. Not just as an agent, but as a mother. Maybe it'll make someone think twice the next time they see a kid who looks like you walking down the street." He thought about that for a moment. "Can I come?" he asked. She looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "You don't have to." "I want to," he said. "If it's about what happened, I should be there." That following week, the meeting was held at the town's community center. The room was filled with people, parents, teachers, local officials, and even a few of the officers' colleagues. The air felt thick with unspoken tension. Everyone knew why they were there. When his mother stepped up to the front of the room, the chatter quieted instantly. She wasn't wearing her work clothes. She didn't want the badge to speak for her tonight. She wanted to speak as a person, as a mother. She began simply telling the story exactly as it happened, not dramatizing it, not softening it. She spoke about her son walking home, the 911 call, the flashing lights, and the fear that followed. Her voice was steady, but every word carried weight. "When I arrived," she said, "I wasn't an agent. I wasn't thinking about procedure or protocol. I was just a mother who thought she might lose her child because someone couldn't see past their assumptions." The room was silent. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. She continued, "I've spent years working with law enforcement. I believe in good officers. But belief doesn't mean ignoring what's wrong. Accountability is not an attack, it's a promise to do better." When she finished, the audience clapped softly at first, then louder. The boy, sitting in the front row, watched her with quiet pride. For the first time since that night, he saw her not as the mother who had to protect him, but as someone trying to protect others too. After the meeting, people came up to speak with them, neighbors, other parents, even a few officers who thanked her for her words. One of them, a young officer, said quietly, "Ma'am, I want to do better." "We all should." Her expression softened. "Then start by listening," she said. That night, on the way home, the boy looked out the car window again. The town looked the same as always. Quiet streets, porch lights glowing, dogs barking in the distance. But it felt like something small had shifted. Maybe not enough to change everything, but enough to start something new. In the days that followed, the investigation into the two officers continued. They were both suspended without pay, and the department announced new training programs on bias awareness and de-escalation. Some people thought it was too little, too late. Others said it was a step in the right direction. The boy didn't know how to feel. Justice, he was learning, didn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it just meant being seen, being heard. One afternoon, he was walking home from school again. He took the same route as before, his basketball bag slung over his shoulder. This time, every step felt heavier but also more deliberate. He noticed a few people wave from their porches. One woman even smiled and said, "Good to see you, sweetheart." He smiled back politely. It was a small thing, but it mattered. When he got home, his mother was sitting at the dining table sorting through papers. She looked up and smiled. "You walked?" He nodded. "Yeah, I wanted to." She nodded approvingly. "Good. You shouldn't have to be afraid to walk home." For a moment, they both sat there in silence. Then he said softly, "Do you think things will really change?" She looked at him thoughtfully. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she said. "But it starts with people who refuse to give up. People who speak even when it's hard. People like you," he smiled faintly. "I didn't do anything." "Yes, you did," she said. "You stayed calm. You told the truth. You reminded people that behind every headline is a real person." Her words stuck with him long after that conversation ended. Weeks turned into months. The attention slowly faded. The reporters stopped calling and life began to settle again. But something inside both of them had shifted permanently. They'd become stronger, more aware and more connected than before. One evening, the boy stood outside shooting hoops in the driveway. The air was cool, and the sun was setting just like it had that night months ago. His mother stepped outside and leaned against the porch railing. watching him quietly. "Getting better," she said with a smile. He grinned, trying to. They stayed like that for a while, just the sound of the ball bouncing and the calm of an ordinary evening. For the first time in a long time, it really did feel ordinary again. But deep down, they both knew they'd never forget. That one night had changed how they saw the world, and how the world saw them. And even though the fear of that moment would never completely disappear, what remained was something stronger. A reminder of courage, of truth, of how even the quietest voices can shake the ground when they refuse to be silent. Months had passed since that night, but the memory still lived quietly in their home, tucked into the corners of their thoughts. Life had settled on the surface, but deep down, both mother and son knew things weren't truly the same. They had moved forward, school, work, daily life, but the echo of that moment never really went away. The town had changed too. People looked at them differently now, not with pity but with a strange mix of respect and discomfort. The story had made many think, but not everyone liked thinking about what it revealed. Some neighbors had gone quiet around them, unsure of what to say. Others became more vocal, thanking his mother for speaking up, telling her she'd opened their eyes. The boy didn't care much for the attention anymore. He just wanted peace. He wanted to play basketball, laugh with his friends, and walk home without feeling eyes on his back. But every time he saw a police car pass by, he tensed up a little. Even when nothing happened, the sound of sirens made his heart race. His mother noticed it every time. She never said anything in the moment, but when they were home, she'd find a quiet way to talk about it. "It's okay to still feel that way," she told him once. "Your body remembers fear even when your mind tries to forget it." He nodded. He wished forgetting was easier. Meanwhile, the internal investigation was still ongoing. Weeks turned into months, and while statements had been taken and reports filed, little seemed to change. His mother, being in law enforcement herself, knew how slow systems could move. But knowing didn't make waiting easier. One afternoon, she received a call from the department's Internal Affairs Division, asking her to come in for a final review meeting. She agreed immediately. After hanging up, she sat at her desk for a moment, staring at the badge lying beside her laptop. The metal glinted in the light, polished but cold. She thought about what it stood for: protection, justice, integrity, and how easily those words could lose their meaning when the wrong people wore it. When the day of the meeting arrived, she drove to the station with quiet determination. Her son wanted to go with her, but she told him to stay home. "I'll handle this," she said gently. Inside, the air was cool and sterile. She was shown to a small conference room where 3 officials sat waiting: the internal affairs investigator, the police chief, and a department attorney. They greeted her politely, but there was tension in the air. The kind that fills a room when everyone knows what's about to be discussed isn't easy. They began with formalities, reading through reports and timelines. The investigator spoke about policy violations, the lack of proper de-escalation, and failure to verify the situation before confrontation. She listened carefully, her expression unreadable. She'd been in meetings like this before, just never with her own child at the center of the report. Finally, the police chief cleared his throat and said, "We want to formally apologize for what happened that night." She didn't respond right away. She looked at him steadily and said, "An apology is a start, but an apology without change is just a performance." He shifted uncomfortably. "We've taken disciplinary action," he said. "Both officers have been reassigned and required to undergo additional training." She nodded slowly. "Reassigned," she repeated. "So they're still working the streets?" "Yes," he said. "But under supervision." She leaned forward slightly. "Chief, I appreciate the gesture, but tell me, if I hadn't pulled up that night, if I wasn't wearing this badge, would we still be sitting here talking about training? Or would this meeting be about something far worse?" The room went silent. No one answered. After a long pause, she stood. "I don't need words," she said softly. "I need proof. I need to see that the next mother doesn't have to stand between her son and a mistake that could take his life." When she left the station, she didn't feel angry, just tired. Tired of watching the same cycle repeat. Tired of fighting systems that moved slower than truth. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table with her son, telling him what had happened. "They apologized," she said. "Does that mean it's over?" he asked. Not really, she said. But it's a step. He frowned. It doesn't feel like a step. It feels like nothing changed. She looked at him thoughtfully. Change doesn't always happen where you can see it, she said. Sometimes it starts with conversations people don't want to have. He didn't fully understand what she meant, but he nodded anyway. He trusted her, not just because she was his mother, but because she'd been right about everything so far. Later that week, she received an invitation to speak again, this time at a regional law enforcement training event. They wanted her to share her experience, to talk about bias and accountability from both sides of the badge. She hesitated at first. She wasn't sure she wanted to stand in front of a room full of officers again, but she thought of her son and the fear in his eyes that night. She thought about the next mother who might not make it in time, so she said yes. The event took place in a large hall filled with officers from different departments. She stood at the front, microphone in hand, looking out at the sea of uniforms. For a moment, she felt the weight of the moment press down on her. The history, the expectations, the unspoken resistance in the room. But she began anyway. She didn't lecture. She told a story, her story. The story of a teenager walking home, a mistaken call, and two officers who saw danger instead of innocence. She spoke about fear, about hesitation, about what it feels like to be on both sides of the line, to wear the badge and still be afraid for your child. When she finished, there was silence. No applause, no immediate reaction, just quiet reflection. And that was enough for her. Silence meant they were thinking. Afterward, a few officers approached her privately. One young woman said, "I never thought about how it looks from the other side. Thank you for sharing that." Another officer admitted, "It's easy to forget the power we carry with that badge. Your story reminded me why I joined in the first place." When she got home that night, her son was waiting up for her. "How did it go?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Better than I expected," she said. They listened. He looked relieved. "That's good." "It is," she said. Listening is where change begins. Over the next few months, she started working with a small group of community leaders and officers to develop workshops for youth and police. They called it Bridging the Street, focusing on dialogue, understanding, and respect. She made sure her son attended the first session, not as a speaker but as a listener. When it was his turn to share, he stood up nervously and said, "I don't hate police. I just don't want to be afraid of them." The room was quiet for a long time after that. His words were simple, but they carried truth. After the session ended, an older officer approached him and said, "You've got courage, kid. Don't lose that." For the first time in a long while, the boy smiled without feeling heavy. That night, as they sat together at home, his mother looked at him and said, "You see? Sometimes change starts small, but it grows." He nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "But it starts because someone decides to speak." She smiled, proud of the strength he was beginning to find in himself. The fear hadn't vanished completely, but now it was joined by something else: understanding, courage, and the belief that even broken systems could bend towards something better when people cared enough to make them. The world outside their house hadn't transformed overnight. There were still headlines, still anger, still confusion, but there was also progress. New training policies, more conversations, people speaking up when they saw something wrong. And though the road ahead was long, they both knew that night had given them something unbreakable, a voice that would never again stay silent in the face of injustice. A year had passed since that night, but for the boy and his mother, the memory never fully faded. It had become a quiet part of their lives, something they didn't talk about often, but something that shaped the way they moved through the world. It wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a turning point, one that changed how they saw people, how they saw themselves, and how they understood the power of silence and courage. Life had slowly found its rhythm again. The boy had finished school and was getting ready for college. He still loved basketball, still walked home with his headphones on, but he walked with a different kind of awareness now. Not fear, just alertness, the kind that comes from knowing how quickly things can shift in a single second. His mother had grown even more dedicated to her work. After speaking publicly at several events, she had started working on a community program that helped bring young people and officers together for open conversations. She wasn't trying to change the whole world, just her part of it. But even that small effort had started to make ripples. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch, the sun low in the sky, the boy turned to her and said quietly, "Do you think they really changed?" She took a moment before answering. "Some of them did," she said softly. "Some learned something that night. Some probably didn't. But that's how it is with people. You can't force understanding, you can only show it." He nodded, his eyes distant. "Sometimes I still see it in my head," he said. "The lights, the shouting. It just plays again." She reached over, placing a hand on his shoulder. "That's normal," she said. "But remember, that moment didn't end the story. It started something bigger." He looked at her, curious. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly. "You're stronger now. You've seen what fear looks like, and you didn't let it break you. That's power. Not the kind people carry in badges or titles, but the kind that comes from surviving and still choosing to believe in something better." The boy didn't say anything right away, but her words settled in him like a seed, quiet but alive. As the weeks passed, he began volunteering with his mother's program. At first, he just helped set up chairs, print flyers, and organize sessions. But slowly, he started speaking too. Not because he wanted to be in the spotlight, but because people asked him to share his story. And every time he did, the room grew quiet, not out of pity, but because people listened. He didn't dramatize it. He just told it as it was. A walk home, a misunderstanding, fear, and a mother who refused to let silence write the ending. One night after a session, a young officer approached him outside. "I was there that night," the officer said softly. The boy froze, unsure how to respond. "Not one of the ones who stopped you," the man continued quickly. "But I heard it on the radio. I didn't understand then what it meant. I do now. I'm sorry." The boy looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you," he said simply. There was nothing else to add. Sometimes forgiveness wasn't a conversation. It was just a moment of recognition. His mother watched from a distance, her heart full of quiet pride. She knew how hard it was for both of them, to face the past, to speak about it without letting anger take over. But they were doing it. Together. Later that night, as they drove home, the boy stared out the window at the passing streetlights. "You know," he said, "when it happened, I thought it was just about me. But now I see it's bigger than that." His mother glanced at him. "It always was," she said gently. "But understanding that doesn't mean it has to define you. It just means you have a voice that matters." He smiled slightly. "You always say that." "Because it's true," she replied with a small laugh. "And I'll keep saying it until you believe it." Their laughter filled the car, light and unguarded. It had been a long time since laughter came easily, but that night it felt different, freer, like something heavy had finally lifted between them. Over the next few months, their story continued to reach people. News outlets did quiet follow-ups. Schools invited them to talk about respect, and even the local police department added their workshop to its annual training. It wasn't about fame or attention, it was about awareness, about planting seeds in people's minds that would hopefully grow into something better. Still, not everyone liked the changes. There were comments online, criticism from those who said they were exaggerating or using the situation for attention, but his mother never let that bother her. "People fear what challenges them," she said one evening. "If our story makes someone uncomfortable, that means they're thinking." That's progress. The boy admired her strength. To him, she was more than an agent, more than a mother. She was proof that standing up didn't mean shouting the loudest. It meant staying steady, even when others tried to shake you. One day, near the anniversary of the incident, they received a letter from the police chief. Inside was a short note. "We've implemented new community response training inspired by your case. Thank you for helping us see what we couldn't before." His mother read it twice before setting it down. "It's a start," she said softly. The boy picked it up, scanning the neat handwriting. "It feels strange," he admitted. "Like something good came out of something bad." She nodded. "That's life. Pain doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it builds." That evening, they decided to take a walk, the same route he had taken that night a year ago. The air was cool, the sky painted with streaks of orange and pink. He walked quietly at first, his eyes tracing every familiar corner. When they reached the spot where the patrol cars had once stopped him, he paused. "Right here," he murmured. His mother stood beside him, her hand gently resting on his back. "And here you are," she said softly. "Still standing." He let out a long breath, the kind that feels like letting go. I used to hate this spot, he admitted. But now, I don't. It's just a place. Exactly, she said. It's not what happened here that defines it. It's what you chose to do after. They stood there a while longer, watching the world move on. Cars passing, children laughing in the distance, life continuing as it always does. And in that quiet moment, something inside him settled. The fear that once haunted him didn't vanish completely, but it no longer ruled him. In its place was something stronger: resilience. As they walked back home, his mother said, "You know, sometimes people think courage means running into danger. But real courage is standing your ground when life tries to make you small." He smiled. "You sound like one of your speeches again." She laughed softly. "Maybe, but you need to hear it." He glanced at her and said, "You know, I think I get it now. What you did that night, you didn't just protect me. You taught me how to protect myself." Her eyes softened. "That was always the point," she said. By the time they reached home, the streetlights had come on, casting a soft glow on the quiet neighborhood. He looked back one last time at the road behind them, the same one that once held so much fear, and smiled. Inside, he placed the police chief's letter on the fridge beside a photo of him, holding his college acceptance letter. It wasn't just a picture or a note. It was a reminder of how far they'd come. That night, as he sat by the window, he thought about the future. College, new faces, new places. But no matter where he went, he carried something that couldn't be taken from him. The lesson that silence can be dangerous. But a voice, even one that trembles, can move mountains. And somewhere deep inside, he knew his mother had given him more than protection that night. She had given him the courage to believe that change, no matter how slow, always begins with someone brave enough to stop the cycle. The world outside still had its problems. There were still stories like his, still moments of misunderstanding and fear. But he also knew there were people fighting quietly to make things better, people like his mother, and in his heart, he made a promise. To never let what happened define him, but to use it to define what kind of person he would be. Because sometimes, the greatest power a person can hold isn't a badge or a weapon. It's empathy, strength, and the will to do what's right even when it's hard. As the night deepened, he closed his eyes, no longer haunted by flashing lights or shouted words, just calm, steady breathing. A year ago, he had been a frightened kid. Now he was something more, a survivor, a believer, a voice. And though he didn't say it out loud, he knew his mother had been right all along. Change doesn't always come fast, but it always starts somewhere. And for them, it started that night, and with fear, courage, and a mother who refused to stay silent.